The Delaware County Historical Society presents a special walking tour in downtown Delaware. Titled Young and Old Rutherford B. Hayes Walking Tour, this event was held on Sunday, October 3rd. The tour included locations related to Rutherford B. Hayes' life. The walk featured society volunteers and Hayes reenactors, Devon Hardwick as young Hayes and Bill Rietz as older Hayes. Brent Carson was a tour guide. Young Hayes described in detail childhood memories of what he described as his world around the area of West William Street and Franklin Street. Older Hayes discussed, among other things, his devotion to his duties as a member of Ohio Wesleyan's Board of Trustees and in his participation in laying the cornerstone of University Hall.
Once again, welcome guests to the Beaker Barn. And if we couldn't do it on the walk downtown today, well, this would be a good spot because President Hayes would have recognized this place. I mean, coming down this main road right out here, this would have been a regular route that he would have followed to Columbus. And he would have also known the Beakers because of the fact that the Beakers, his father bought the land where they lived downtown from the Beakers, Forrest Beaker. Well, welcome here to this spot though. And if we were walking, in fact that's what we'll really be doing in your mind today as we take that walk, that journey right here. Before we do that, I'd like to introduce a few people or to make knowledge of a few people who really helped with this. Of course our filmers, Diana Sanfilippo and Brad Cowan right here, but we've also had a lot of people behind the scenes working on this. We have had a lot of research go into this to come up with all this information so that it isn't all made up and that it is actually based on fact. And we've had a lot of help with that. From Susan Logan, from Steve Shaw, and of course our Rutherford B. Hayes reenactors themselves, Bill Rietz and Devon Hardwick, have also done research. I also, most of all though, I want to thank Rutherford B. Hayes. And here's why. He was a historian. He was in his house up in Fremont. At Spiegel Grove was a room when you take the tour that they talk about as the Little Smithsonian, because he was a collector of political, or of memorabilia, not political memorabilia, of memorabilia regarding the United States. He was also a writer. From the time he was a teenager to the very last week of his life, he kept a diary. He not only kept a diary, but that diary is online. You can read that diary. As most of us in this audience today, I'm sure, are aware, I certainly am aware that that era before the internet, before the emails, the texts, the cell phones, we were writers. If you wanted to contact somebody, you had to write them a letter or a note. That's how you got a hold of people. And the Hayes family were writers. Rutherford Hayes, Sophia Hayes, his mother, Fanny, his sister, Arsena, his cousin, all of these people were ardent writers, and Hayes the historian kept it all. And that also is available for reading. With that kind of a background, we were able to put this together, because Hayes came back to this town a lot. Now, I thought about starting our walk today down at the birthplace site. But no, instead I thought we will begin right here, and I want to show you then this picture. We'll begin at this site, familiar to most Delaware people. This is such an important site to the city of Delaware. Every town has a place where it began. Every place could say it started here. But most of those places that you would find Today it's asphalt, cement, and buildings. We are fortunate to have a spot in our community where it's still somewhat natural. Ohio Wesleyan University has preserved that valley down through there. And it was the area where this town started, right beside this spring. So it was important to the town. I've, over the years, taken literally thousands of people there, third graders, different classes, and adults, to this spot, the Sulfur Spring at Ohio Wesleyan, to talk about how a town begins. And I can tell you just a little bit before we get to young Hayes visiting with us, I can tell you that the town, when they moved here, was only 9 years old. They moved here in 1817. It was still wilderness around this area. There could not have been more than 100 to 150 people here in this town when they moved here. And some of the things that a young Hayes would have recognized, or the Hayes family when they first arrived even would have recognized, was just across the creek down here. Now I'm already into talking about me standing at the spring. So just down the street, away from the stadium right there on Henry Street, you cross that creek, and there is St. Mary parking lot on the one side of the street, and across in the green area on the other side was Azariah Root's house. He and his wife lived there. He was the person who surveyed the town, who helped the founder, Moses Bixby, lay out that town. The Hayeses would have known the Roots. And then down on William Street, across from St. Mary's School, there on William Street, the house that was built by Moses Bixby for his son. His house would have stood right beside it. I'm on the north side of the street, and they would have recognized that. They would have recognized the Lamb home, Dr. Lamb, the only doctor in the community at that time, when they first arrived anyway, and other places here in this community. Well, this time though, I would have originally said that down by the creek I saw young Hayes walking, and I would have called him over to us. We'll switch that around a little bit today. Today, I met him earlier today, and he was down by that creek. And by the way, the year now is 1858. He was now 36 years of age. And I spotted him over by that creek, but he came down here after we took a walk today throughout the town. I spotted him by the creek. I said, how about let's take a walk through this town if you have time? And he was gracious. And I'd like to introduce to you Rutherford Hayes.
Well, thank you for that introduction, sir.
Welcome to Delaware.
Pleasure to be here again.
Wow, it's great to have you. Have a seat. We'll talk about this walk.
I have to admit,
Yes.
this is a barn. Where are the
Yes.
horses? I'm
Yes.
terribly confused by this. This is the cleanest barn I've ever been in.
Well, we did a lot of work to get ready for you today.
And it doesn't even smell.
Well, I can understand that too.
It's
but-
impeccable. You can eat off the floor.
Well, that's fantastic. I'm glad that you appreciate this.
Oh, good heavens, what kind of chair is that? It's a bit of a torture device, isn't it?
We really work hard to please
Oh,
our
my.
people when they come to Delaware, I
Good
can tell you.
heavens.
Yes, we've walked all the way around because you used to live here. And when I spotted you over by that creek, I thought, I bet that guy is out wandering around just to see this town. And sure enough, and you agreed to come down there to where I was over at the spring a bit ago. And we started there, didn't we? And we walked through that campus. You were telling me just how important that spring was to you.
Well, that spring, as you were saying, was the birthplace of this community. But it was also the birthplace of a lot of happy memories of my childhood. You know, my uncle had a brewery right across the river, right across the Delaware Run there. And so I had lots of happy memories as a child playing along the run. And of course, there was the spring. And we'd have lots of time spent there reading and enjoying the water. And of course, taking the benefits of the sulfur waters and the smells. And of course, later on, that's of course where I would propose to my wife, but that's a story for further on down the road here.
Oh my. That is an important spot then for you.
Oh, yes.
Now, going down through that valley there, you say there was the brewery across the creek, on the
Yes.
north side of the creek. And then, wasn't there a tannery that you mentioned, that you remember a tannery back towards Sandusky Street along there?
Well, as they were building the mansion house, the hotel where they would breathe the waters, so take the waters in, there was a tannery right there along the Delaware Run as well. And I remember my sister and I, we would go and collect fallen timber and fallen sticks and so on and so forth to go and help keep the fires going in the tannery. Oh yes.
Wow. And you were talking about some of your old friends too, coming fishing down by the river. Manning Cowell?
Cowell, yes.
Yes, and some others, and he went down there. He was telling me this. He was telling me about his friend. They were fishing on one side, you said, of the creek, and then he wanders across to the other side.
Well, it was a bit of the water was slightly lower. You could wade across the Delaware Run at that point in time.
But this is the river, even, yes?
Oh,
There's
yes.
a river you could,
Oh, yes.
Right.
But I remember as a child those banks being so terribly steep. I don't, as an adult now, going back, of course, I was looking for the old burial ground when you saw me earlier today.
Yeah.
Yes, I couldn't find it to save my life.
They've moved it, Rutherford. I know, as a chuck, they moved the whole thing, yes.
Really?
It's been moved
It's a
down.
bit sacrilege, don't you think?
Well, it's the way of the times. They've decided that they needed to move it, and they moved it down the street a ways. But yes, maybe you'll have a chance to see that sometime.
Oh, I have to go look for it later then.
Yes. Well, yes, that cemetery was there. Of course, across the street. There've been some changes, haven't there?
Oh my word, yes.
This is. One more thing. Going back to that, across the river. You were telling me about walking. Your friend walked on across the river, and you and your friend who stayed on this side didn't like to go over there because of all the poisonous snakes.
Yes.
On the other side that you stayed on.
We were so terribly afraid there were poisonous snakes over there, so we didn't cross over the river. No.
But your one friend did, and eventually you had to get him in. But lots of memories down along there.
Well, like you said, that area, that valley of Delaware was the birthplace of the community, and it was the birthplace of so many fond memories of all of us.
Yes.
Kids that grew up here at the time.
Yes. And I had to shock you that you were looking, you said, for the mansion house.
Yes.
And you said, it's not here.
Well,
and I said, oh, they moved it. And you said, they moved the whole building?
I was absolutely dumbfounded by this. Of course, here we are by the Sulfur Springs, and I'm looking for the beautiful yellow mansion house. Couldn't find it to save my life. And I was, as we're wandering, I'm thinking, I've misplaced this somewhere. My memories aren't quite clear here for something. Couldn't find it, so I mentioned to Brent, I said, did they tear it down? Of course, here stands this big, beautiful limestone building. And he said, no, they didn't move. They didn't tear it down, of course. They had moved it. And what a colossal feat that would be. My heavens.
Yes, they've moved it back behind. It's very well kept, but they moved it back behind there, and they replaced it with that other building that's there. You were saying something about the cornerstone of that building, the Christ.
Well, as we were walking along up that path towards Sandusky Street, I couldn't help but admire the beautiful limestone building that they built in the place of where Mansion House was. And the cornerstone reads, Christ, the chief cornerstone. And I thought, that really does ring home. Because you think of all the memories that we have, good and bad. They create the building blocks of our foundation, but we have to remember, Christ above all is that chief cornerstone. So that touched home quite a bit to me.
Wow.
It was well put.
And all through this, I kept thinking, you're impressive. I mean, if you don't mind my saying so, it doesn't surprise me that you said that you're an attorney.
Oh, yes.
And well, where are you now, did you say?
I'm living in Cincinnati.
That's Cincinnati.
Yes, law practice in Cincinnati.
And you're married?
Oh, yes. Well, of course, as I said, that Sulfur Springs, Lucy Webb, of course, many of you are familiar with the Webb family. we had started courting, and again, many happy hours and walks had spent along the Delaware Run up to the Sulfur Springs, and of course, I ended up proposing to her on the steps of the Mansion House. That's why I was looking for it and so surprised that it had been moved. You know, it held such a strong memory in my heart that it was disheartening that it had been torn down, but I was quite thankful to see that it had been moved.
Yes, indeed. Yes, and you had mentioned about also about the even other buildings that are there that have been changed, but I was surprised that you recognized as much as you had. Because now Fanny is in Cincinnati?
Yes. Fanny's in Cincinnati as well. Yes.
Did she get up there at all?
No.
No,
not unfortunately, no.
Yeah. Well, it's.
You mean Lucy's in Cincinnati?
I apologize.
Fanny passed away 4 years ago.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
She was living in Columbus at the time.
Yes, indeed. And she sure meant a lot to you, I know. And sorry, I mixed that up there.
Oh, no. Well, I was going along with it for a moment, but I wasn't quite sure where you were going.
You know what? That makes two of us.
Yeah.
But continuing on this journey that we've had, you knew a lot of people in this town, and again, when we began then to take the walk down through town, and I think you mentioned it, but isn't that true, though, that when you cross a creek and you saw how steep those sides were, that they don't seem as steep? Isn't that the way it is with kids? Everything seems bigger.
Oh, yes.
And they are steep.
They are
but
indeed.
Just not like the steep when you were a little boy down there walking with Fanny down there. I bet they really did seem steep.
Well, they did indeed seem steep at the time.
Yes, indeed.
Excuse me,
Yes.
Mr. John Little is here.
Oh, what a treat.
Very good. Your old friend is here.
Yes. Well, I'll join you in a moment. I'd like to go say hello to him.
Oh, of course. Yes, feel free to.
Thank you for listening to me. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Yes, it is quite a person. And the fact that he's back here for a visit. You know, he was telling me about the fact that he did not go to Ohio Wesleyan, but he went to Kenyon College because Kenyon was in existence before Ohio Wesleyan. And I think that he said that we'll ask him when he comes back, but he said that Ohio Wesleyan was built the year he graduated from Kenyon, which is why he probably chose there rather than, of course, being his own hometown. Yes, and now that he's gone, let me go back here and show you some of the sites that we've talked about and that they have to move over to here. Let me point this out. You can watch either of these screens, but I'm going to stay right over here on this side. And I'm pointing down here. There's the creek we're talking about. And here we are in 1830, a map of this town. And here's our Delaware Run, dumping its stream into the Olentangy River right there, then called the Whetstone. But along here, all the way through town, runs that Delaware Run with that important spring right here, already marked on that map there. We then have Sandusky Street right here. And we were talking about when he left right now. Now, if we were walking before, he would have made the excuse of leaving us, saying that he's going to go up to the parade grounds. He wanted to see the parade grounds and to stop perhaps by Lucy's house, the Webb's house, that was on the corner of, let me see here where we are, right here. Would have been along in this area is where Lucy Webb would have lived on the corner of Spring Street. I'm sorry, I need to go down a block down here. Down here, near the run is where that would have been located. And then he's going to, after coming there, he's going to meet back up with us downtown. That's the route you would have taken. But what I'd like to do, though, right now is talk a little bit more of things that we wouldn't have been talking with Mr. Hayes about. Heading on up that walk there toward Gray Chapel, toward University Hall. And down through that valley. Again, we get an idea as how much nature has been left along there in that important area where he was wandering through. At University Hall, Great Chapel, the cornerstone that he pointed out, that he spotted walking by there. He didn't mention the date, thank goodness. After all, this is only 1858 right now. That might have confused him. The Mansion House, today the History Department at Ohio Wesleyan. I mentioned the Bixby home on William Street. Moses Bixby, the founder of the city, had built for his son. The Lamb home. Actually, this was the second Lamb home. The Lamb first lived catty corner from that, where, I forget what they call it now, the Sarah Moore home. I forget his name now. But that's where the Lambs lived. And the Lamb, of course, Mr. Lamb, Dr. Lamb was in business with President Hayes' father and was there the night that President Hayes was born. And the Hayes Birthplace. By now on our walk, we would have been down to the corner of William and Sandusky while young Rutherford wanders off for a while to talk about his home, his birthplace. There where the BP station is, which we are all so fortunate that they named it BP for birthplace. The home was taken down. We discussed this there because people wondered, that has been quite a trademark for Delaware. They tore down the home of the president to build a gas station. Well, yes, they did, but there's a lot more to it than that. Back in 1910, the same year the high school burnt down, the Hayes house burnt. The back part of the house, the wooded portion back here, burned off. And in the article, it talks about the fact that a number of people were living there at the time. No one was injured. The lady who lived in the back portion with her children is where it started, in the chimney. And so that was entirely destroyed off the back. And at the end of the article it said, they will probably not maintain the rest of this building much longer because of the fact that President Hayes was born in the back portion of the house, in the wooded portion, not in the front, and it is now burned off. Well, it was to become a furniture store. That was the plan for it. Now, Mr. Devon, who owned the property, was already, when they did get to the point of getting ready to tear it down, they were going to tear it down because he'd already been selling furniture out of there. The rumors had left, and he was selling furniture out of the house. Decided to tear it down and build a bigger furniture store. The article in the paper about that said that, yes, that is true, and that there are some historians who are disappointed in the fact that they're tearing down that house, where others, in fact most, are glad that they're doing it, simply because they thought it was an eyesore and that they needed a furniture store. Never happened. They didn't start a furniture store there. Next plan was that this was to become the Delaware Library. The city was going to purchase it, tear down the house, build the library there, and that never happened. Then it was going to be, let's see here, the Women's Christian Temperance Union. of the state of Ohio were going to take that building and have it as their headquarters. Why not? Lucy Hayes was Lemonade Lucy and would have approved of that. Never happened. 1926, Standard Oil purchases that property at a time when this town had 3 major U.S. routes right there at the center of town. At a time when gas stations were everywhere, but particularly looking for a spot where you had that much traffic before bypasses and interstates. So that was a key spot. They bought it for $8,000. When they realized it was the president's home, they offered to sell it back for $8,000. And after they raised the money for the $8,000, if the town was interested, then Standard Oil would offer a little bit of money for restoration. First day, they raised $3,000 to save that home. That was the first day. And that the Hayes family eventually came along and said, we will match what you raise if your town is really interested in saving that. The living son of President Hayes, still the last son, offered that amount of money. In that initial $3,000, Senator Willis, Governor Davis, President Harding, and 3 or 4 others offered $50 apiece of the $3,000 to get things started on that. It went on, and things slowed down. Many were asking, why are you trying to save that if the back portion was where he was born? Why are you trying to save the front? This was in 1926. Well, others were saying that no, he was not born in the back part of the house. He was born in the front part of the house, including President Hayes himself, who, as he said, he of course didn't remember, but everything that he had been told by his mother and all was that he was born in the front room on the left, is where he was born. The neighbor, who was still living at this time, also spoke of the fact that no, he was born in the front part, in the room that President Hayes had talked about there on the left at the front. Eventually, though, it was taken down, and then the gas station built in its place. I guess the one thing, there's not many places that have had a gas station there almost 100 years, but that's beside the point. Well, wanted to give you a little information there, since we won't be walking down to the birthplace site, but instead right now we would be crossing the street on Sandusky and William and stopping at the statue on the other side of the street. Let me come back to this one. The statue there on the corner of William and Sandusky, there by Amato's Pizza, was placed there 2 years ago, and I know Jack here was a part of that committee and all to have that placed there. By the way, in the right leg of that statue are the hundreds and hundreds of students from Hayes High School who gave money to help have that placed there also. But just before they put it in, they slid those long sheets of paper into that leg where they will be preserved forever. You know that. Many people, I'm sure, don't know that little fact. The statue itself stands, I think it's about 7 feet tall, 25% above natural size, which is a common technique of people putting in statues, because when you're sitting in a car a little ways away or crossing the street a little distance, if it were actual size, they'd say, why did they make that statue out to make him look like a midget? A small person there, because, but by having it this height, they say that is the traditional plan when they place a statue there. I will go back here, though, just for a moment, to this. The Hayeses only lived at that house, down where the BP is now, for about a year. President Hayes had passed, his father had passed away just before he was born. They had already purchased the land a couple blocks away with plans to build at that location. They were renting the birthplace home from Moses Bixby until they could get a house built. But about a year later, they moved on down the street to their second home. I showed this one, and I think it was Roger, you were mentioning to me that this is probably the oldest downtown structure as far as in the business district. And you take a look at this home from this angle, and it looks like an old house. And when you looked at the President Hayes' home, not a whole lot different. A two-story brick home. And when you see here in a minute what we think the home that he built where William Street Church stands, when you see that, you realize all three of them look like about the same size, same style. It's no wonder that when people came looking for Mrs. Hayes, and I'm talking long before President Hayes was famous, when they came to look for the Hayeses, and Mrs. Hayes had moved on down the street, they'd stop at the birthplace home and say, "Is Mrs. Hayes here?" They'd say, "No, they've moved on down the block. They're down on the corner now." Well, I could see that happening, that the person then goes to the corner where Barney Hofsters is and knocks on the door and says, "Is Mrs. Hayes here?" It was Sophia Hayes herself who wrote at a later time to, I believe it was, to her cousin, saying that, by the way, I can't remember what the lady's name was, who lived where Barney Hofsters was, she is now saying that she will no longer let her daughter come to the door. She's tired of people coming and saying, "Is Mrs. Hayes here?" Since she doesn't live here, she lives one more block down where the William Street Church stands today. And so with that, I want to show you this. There's where we're talking, where the William Street Church stands today. And now I want to show you this. This drawing done by Rod Arter. Among President Hayes' writings, he wrote at one point a very detailed description of what it looked like around his house. Now this is in his older age. After he was president, he wrote this detailed description talking about how many trees of a certain kind were there and what all was planted there, and the cherry trees out along the front, along the front of the house, and of the original William Street Methodist Church on the other corner. Now the Hayes home, right here we are. The original church was on the other corner, on the northwest corner, and that shows a drawing of what it probably looked like back in the 1800s. And today there is another house in between that spot, but this drawing is to show you the school that President Hayes attended that we'll talk about here shortly. I want to point out a couple people in this picture before we move on. On the front doorstep of the house, Sophia Hayes, Rutherford's mother. Rutherford, right here. Fanny, President Hayes' older sister, right here, waving across the street to the cousin, Arsena, and her husband, Thomas Wasson. they moved across the street. And that was quite a thing when they moved across that street. As I understand it, Arsena, who came with the family when they first arrived to Delaware, and then Rutherford, Hayes' father, passed away, leaving Sophia to raise the kids. And Arsena, who was related to Mrs. Hayes, stayed with them to help. Of course, an uncle came into this also, Sardis, and we'll be talking about him. But the story of this was that Rutherford Hayes, or Fanny, when she found out that that Arsena had a boyfriend, she was not happy, because Arsena was everything to her. And then Arsena said, "I'm moving away across the street." She was devastated to think that she's moving from our house. And to assure her, the artist drew Arsena waving back over there. "It's okay, Fanny. I'm just across the street from you." You know, and so this is the scene that we have. By the way, the dog, we don't know the dog's name, sorry. At this point, we would have been standing right now talking about this picture. Right over there where that bank is building right there on the southeast corner of William and Franklin Street. And of course, again, William Street Church right over here, the present William Street Church. And at this point, we would have had Rutherford returning from his journey up to the parade grounds and down to see to see Lucy's house down on the other corner. And now he's rejoined us. Now, a little different setting here. If you remember a little bit ago, young Rutherford met John Biddle, his old friend, who showed up here, down here to see him. And but he said he'd be back, and I think maybe Rutherford.
I just walked in the door.
Oh, well, thank you for coming back.
It was quite a treat seeing him. Of course, you know I'm staying with him while I'm here in town. Of course, many of you are familiar with the little family, I'm sure. John's father owns most of the land going out west of town towards Marysville.
And I understand you spent a lot of time down at the...
Oh, good heavens, this thing is going to be the death of me.
that you spent a lot of time down at the little store down there, the dry goods store.
Oh, yes. We had, again, quite a few childhood memories there, you know, running amok in his father's store. And it was our own little world in there.
And I think you mentioned to me about back in the day, there were many American Indians coming in through from farther north and would stop in the store also. You would see many of them.
Oh, yes. Well, and that was slightly startling for us because we were we were a more civilized, up-and-coming community here at this point in time in the late 1820s, 1830s. And so they would come down from Wyandotte County and Marion County, come down, and they would barter and trade in the little store. It was startling at first as a young child, 4 or 5, to see a Native American in full garb coming into the general store to buy, canned goods and other types of provisions that they couldn't get up in, the less civilized areas, less populated areas in Wyandotte County.
Yes. Mm-hmm. When we were taking that walk through town there, and we came there to the corner of William and Franklin, where your house, where you spent most of your years when you were here in Delaware, other than your birthplace home, that was your home, wasn't it?
Yes.
Well, and it's changed. It's no longer there, but...
It's 1840. It's 1858. It's still standing there, to my knowledge.
Oh. Yes, of course it is. Of course it is. Yes, I'm sorry. It's been a long day. I forgot we were on.
Well,
thank you. Yes. What do you remember, though, about growing up there at this location?
Well, I tell you, my fondest memory of growing up there on the corner of Franklin and Williams, Franklin and William Streets, my sister Fanny, of course. A lot of my childhood memories revolve around Fanny, and she was so dear to me. Growing up without a father, we were very close as children together. She taught me how to read and write. And we had many happy hours spent sitting along in the tree lawn underneath the cherry trees that you just mentioned.
Yes.
And we would sit there and watch the stagecoaches and the horses clatter along in the muddy streets, of course. And it was there she would taught me how to read. Reading and writing, and she finally instilled in me enough courage to go to school, of course. Now, of course, I went to school across the street to Mrs. Murray's school, but
Yes.
I was
Yes.
very shy.
In
I
fact,
was terribly shy.
In fact, a little bit ago, we walked all around the corner to that. Just tell them about how shy you were about going to school.
Well, I didn't like to speak in public. Of course, you wouldn't expect that out of me today. But I didn't like to speak in public. I even had a hard time going up and saying hello to strangers, even though, manner dictated a proper introduction. It took Mrs. Murray herself coming over to the house and talking to my mother, talking to Fanny, and of course talking to me, that she would, it wasn't a bad environment. It wasn't a scary environment. It wasn't something to be afraid of.
And Fanny went to the school.
She did, yes.
So she probably helped with Mrs. Murray and getting you to come over, probably.
But I only attended Mrs. Murray's school for about 2 years, They built the first common school just down the street. Of course, on the corner of Winter and Franklin. Of course, now it's where the Andrews Mansion
Yes,
was
and
built several
Andrews,
years ago. Oh, yes, good friends. But I ended up finishing the rest of my primary school there, the new common school.
Yes.
But we learned, that was really those formative years when I was attending the common school, where I got an interest in history and government, and really that was instilled in me there. So I have three institutions, of course. Well, Mrs. Murray and Fanny, of course, for instilling that love of reading and writing, and then the common school for really focusing on where we came from and where we're going. And of course, still at that point in time when I was in common school, this talk of succession was just starting to come up. This talk of abolition was just starting to come up in the rhetoric. And of course I didn't know what was going on. But now, after I finished my law degree at Harvard, and it's opened my own practice down in Cincinnati, this continued talk of succession and the South succeeding, it's terribly scary to me. I'm afraid that this question of slavery is going to tear this country apart. Lucy and I, of course, are both abolitionists. We both believe that slavery was a terrible institution.
Do you think it could come to war?
I'm terribly afraid it will. The current political state, I believe that yes, with succession will come war. I'm afraid of that. But I don't mean to dampen the situation, the day-to-day on the talk of succession and possible war. But let's return to happier memories, shall we?
Indeed. Yes, because we then made it to that next quarter there, where you were talking about going down to John Little's house, and you recognize a lot of those homes down there on that street?
Well, as I said, where the new Andrews Mansion is built, I mean, it's this beautiful state-of-the-art house that was just completed several years ago. Fantastic home. But that street, that corridor down Winter, is terribly unchanged since the last time I was here. It's very wonderful for me to see the two steeples of St. Paul's, the Episcopal Church, and the Presbyterian Church where I was baptized, still standing proud, reaching up to God. That's wonderful. It's very reassuring that not everything changes.
Right. Well, it's certainly been a pleasure being with it. You took time today to come not only on the journey with me, but to bring your thoughts down here when I know you don't get back very often. And in fact, I know that we were talking about the fact that you came by train to get here, but my word, it hasn't been very many years before there were no trains, and you were traveling by stagecoach. And that was an ordeal, wasn't it?
Oh, my word. Well, we had what at the time was called corduroy roads, and if you didn't have a corduroy road, it was simply mud. And corduroy roads were roads that were paved with fallen trees.
Right.
And it was a terribly bumpy ride coming up that way, if you can only imagine that.
I can imagine that, yes. That would have been quite an ordeal. But you've taken the time to come back. We hope you keep coming back to Delaware. I know that it's a journey and you no longer live here anymore, but it is certainly good to know that you haven't turned completely away from your old town and your old friends here.
Oh, certainly not. This place holds such fond memories.
And I know that John and your other friends would like to spend some time with you, but it's certainly been a pleasure having you back in Delaware.
Thank you for asking me here.
Thank
today.
you.
Yes, and thank you for listening.
Rutherford. Delightful person. Again, 1858, 2 years before the Civil War, that he would become involved with himself. Let me also, though, mention to you a little bit about the Murray School. There's a picture of it. We believe it to be the oldest house in the city of Delaware on its original foundation. And there, just think, he's so shy to go all the way across the street to that building from where he lived. And there's the Andrews house that he was talking about there on the corner. At that time, in 1858, it would have been a private residence. And before it eventually became the hospital. And there had been a stone school, yes, at that location. That was the first public school, one of the first 4 public schools, a one-room school structure there. Looking down that block would almost be familiar to him. Certainly, as he said, the 2 churches, in between the 2 churches of St. Peter's Episcopal and the First Presbyterian, the old Delaware High School that later became part of Willis School. And it still says high school above that corner. I might mention, though, that Rutherford B. Hayes, by the time he is back here, as he's certainly going to be back to visit you in the last year of his life, by that time, that building too would have been standing. We don't know that he was ever inside of that structure, but certainly, traveling down Winter Street, he, I'm sure, made note of seeing high school above that building. And then we're going to walk on down after this. Young Rutherford's left us. It's now time to transition to Rutherford Hayes in 1892 in June. It's one of his last visits to Delaware. And because of his interest in prison reform, it's no wonder that your walk today would have taken us to old Courthouse Hill, old Briar Hill, the highest place in town, where this structure was built. There's our old Delaware County Jail that we all hope to be a major part of before long. But so he's there at that location when our tour takes us to there. At this time, in fact, I would like to introduce to you former President of the United States, Rutherford B. Hayes. Welcome home.
Thank you, Brent.
Welcome.
Greetings. Happy to make your acquaintance. I am concluding my weekend here in Delaware by attending the annual Ohio Wesleyan University Trustees meetings and the commencement ceremony. I don't know if I've said this to you. I love to walk. It is my usual custom to walk multiple miles a day, regardless of the weather. Today was no exception. I arose at 6 a.m., walked to the campus, and drank abundantly at the dear old spring. I can't think of a better way to start a day. On each visit to Delaware, I walk the community that shaped my childhood and adult life. It stirs up fond memories and allows time for reflection. If you'll permit, I have made extensive notes from past visits and today's walk that I can share with you in the time before my departure for Spiegel Grove and Fremont. I hope this meets your approval. First, I feel the need to share the reason for my family residing excuse me, in Fremont rather than Delaware. After serving 4 years in the Civil War, I represented the Cincinnati area, 2nd District in the House of Representatives. While in Congress, I voted for the 14th Amendment, guaranteeing all citizens the right of equal protection of the laws, and the 15th Amendment, granting African American males the right to vote. I supported the Congressional Plan for Reconstruction and favored full payment of the public debt created by the Civil War. After re-election, I shared with Sardis Bircher. Sardis Bircher was my mother's brother who played a major role in my life. I shared that I was not suited for the life of a legislator in Washington. I was disturbed by divisive congressional debates and had misgivings about the harsher aspects of the radical Republican program. An excursion with several other members of Congress gave me a better understanding of the problems of the post-war South. I rarely attended social functions and spent most of my time administering to the needs of my constituents and taking care of pension claims and matters relating to soldiers. Acceptance of the Republican candidacy for the office of governor in June 1867 offered me a credible excuse to exit from Congress. I was the only Republican on the Ohio ballot that won election, winning by 2,500 votes. 2 years later, I was reelected by a margin of 7,500 votes. After 2 terms, I cite the following as the most notable accomplishments. The initiation of the State Geological Survey placed an emphasis on Ohio's vast natural resources. This has been noted as forward-thinking and crucial to the development of the state. The establishment of the Ohio Agricultural and Mechanical College in Columbus. The implementation of reforms in the state's penal and mental institutions. Ohio's ratification of the 15th Amendment and other African American suffrage legislation. I also took great pride in my efforts to preserve Ohio's historical heritage, including collection of work of the mound builders and collection of pioneer sketches, letters, and other manuscripts throwing light on pioneer history. After holding elected office for more than 7 years, I yearned for the opportunity to retire from public life. I refused to run for a 3rd term and declined an offer from a group of insurgent Republicans in January 1872 to contest the Senate seat. As a delegate to the Republican National Convention, I supported Grant's renomination. That fall, I reluctantly ran for Congress in Cincinnati's upper middle-class 2nd District, where political leaders feared a swing to the liberal Republican-Democratic coalition led by Horace Greeley. Although I outpolled the local Republican ticket, I lost in my bid for a 3rd congressional term. As a reward for my party loyalty, President Grant offered me the position of Assistant United States Treasurer in Cincinnati. Disdaining from any further connections with current politics, I politely declined the appointment. Assuring myself that I was finished with politics for good, I moved the family to Fremont in May of 1873. With Uncle Sardis's Spiegel Grove as our home, I settled down to enjoy the life of a country squire. During these years, I busied myself with such matters as caring for ailing Uncle Sardis, improving his estate, founding the Burchard Public Library and Sandusky County Pioneer and Historical Association in Fremont, and developing his land investments. In 1874, Uncle Sardis passed, leaving me with the majority of his estate. Spiegel Grove would serve as a temporary residence, though. Republican reverses in 1873 and 1874 cut short my retirement to private life. I yielded to my party's call and accepted the Republican nomination for governor in June 1875. Carefully handling cultural issues such as parochial education while adhering to sound money principles, I defeated the incumbent Democrat William Allen. In less than a year's time, I would be inaugurated for an unprecedented 3rd term as governor, win the Republican nomination for president, and be launched into the first congressionally contested election since Jackson Adams in 1824. After serving the pre-election announced one term in the White House, we returned to Spiegel Grove. We loved the 125-acre property and made it our family gathering place. My wife Lucy was my sounding board for many things in my life. We remained active after the White House. It allowed us to travel and support causes that we felt needed addressed. She was a practicing Methodist her entire life. The Bible has been an important book read for me over the years. Personally, I am not a subscriber to any creed. I belong to no church, but in a sense, satisfactory to myself and believed by me to be important, I try to be a Christian. Or rather, I want to be a Christian and help do Christian work. Take, for example, the building behind me, the Delaware County Jail that was completed in 1878. In 1870, the National Prison Association held its first organizational meeting in Cincinnati. As prison reform was an agenda item as governor, I was in attendance. It championed the cause of corrections and correctional effectiveness. The Assembly elected me as the first president of the association. The Declaration of Principles developed at the first meeting in 1870 became the guidelines for corrections in the United States and Europe. The guidelines included changes in how prisoners are treated and housed, contract prison labor, indemnity for wrongful imprisonment, and executive clemency. Personally, I'm opposed to the death penalty. As governor, I was proud of the implementations of reforms in the state's penal institutions. I am impressed with this state-of-the-art jail. Having the sheriff's residence combined with the office and jail was part of the social reform movement I promoted while governor. The sheriff's wife was called the matron. Her duties included cooking meals for the prisoners at the jail. The sheriff's family resided in the front portion of the building, and the inmates were housed in the rear cell block section of the complex. In the post-president years, I actively tour the country, speaking on the ills of prisons and needed reform. Earlier, I walked by the Murray School, which served me up to the 2nd grade, and cited the first common school in Delaware that I attended 3rd through 8th grade. Uncle Sardis convinced Mother that I would benefit from furthering my education in boarding school. He paid the tuition to attend a year in Norwalk, Ohio, and 2 more in Connecticut, after which the headmaster felt I was ready for university-level studies. My mother put her foot down, though, when Sardis discussed enrolling me in a New England school. She wanted her son closer to Delaware. Kenyon College was the choice. My good friend John Little was my roommate and travel companion on the walks from Gambier to Delaware and back for visits home from campus. Mother worried about the length of the 42-mile trip, but she was appreciative of the time we spent together. After 4 years, the faculty selected me valedictorian of my graduating class. I went into law, shadowing an attorney in Columbus. Sardis then had me enroll in Harvard Law School to study and earn a law degree. Near the end of my presidency, I made this comment regarding war and peace. To perpetuate the Union and to abolish slavery were the work of war. To educate the uneducated is the appropriate work of peace. As governor and president, I pushed for state and federal funding for universal education for all. I firmly believe industrial education allows a person to process the skills to be successful. During my first term as governor, I spearheaded the establishment of the Ohio Agricultural and Mechanical College using federal funds available for land-grant universities under the Morrill Act. In 1878, the Ohio General Assembly voted to change the name to The Ohio State University, that is now offering all areas of study. In my 1885 commencement address here at Ohio Wesleyan, I spoke on the educational question of the hour, industrial education. My proposition was that between the age of 14 and the age of leaving school or college, 5 to 10 hours a week should be given to manual labor under the instruction of a skillful teacher. I currently serve on the Board of Trustees at Case Western Reserve, The Ohio State University, along with Ohio Wesleyan. It has been my passion to create ways to educate the poor and minorities. I continue to impress upon the Ohio legislature and representatives to Congress the need for additional spending on opening and improving public education for all youth. The Slater Education Fund for Freedmen interested me from its founding in 1882. I preside over this $1 million endowment, enabling me to attempt actively to further blacks' education in the South and elsewhere. As a child, the area that we're standing on was the highest point in town, known as Briar Hill. It was leveled off to construct this courthouse that was completed in 1868. If you have the opportunity, I strongly encourage you to visit the interior of this impressive building. After graduating from Harvard Law School, I set up a practice in Lower Sandusky, now called Fremont. I relocated to Cincinnati in 1850 to be in a larger population. I did mostly defense work, criminal defense work, It was rewarding to defend the accused and seeing that the law was being properly applied to their case and their rights were protected. I also represented fugitive slaves and their friends in Cincinnati. In the case of Rosetta Armstead, a slave from Kentucky brought to Ohio, I was able to secure her freedom using elements of the Fugitive Slave Act passed by Congress. Upon assuming the office of president, I became the first chief executive to serve who possessed a law school degree. At this time, I want you to join me over near the statue. This statue was dedicated in May of 1884 to recognize the citizens of Delaware County who served in the Civil War, some which gave their lives in preserving the Union. General William Rosecrans, a native of Sunbury area in eastern Delaware County, was present for the dedication. I agreed to go into the service for the war on May 15, 1861, approximately 1 month after the firing on Fort Sumter. My feelings were that this was a just and necessary war and that it demanded the whole power of the country, that I would prefer to go into it if I knew I was to die or be killed in the course of it than to live through and after it without taking any part in it. With no military experience, I volunteered for service at age 40. The governor appointed me a major in the 23rd OVI, the Ohio Volunteer Infantry. After training in Columbus, the 23rd OVI was assigned to the GAR, the Grand Army of the Republic, serving primarily in Virginia, Maryland, and West Virginia. I was wounded 5 times over the course of 4 years. My wife earned the moniker Mother Lucy from the soldiers of the 23rd OVI when she came to the field hospital to tend to my injuries. Mother Lucy was never remiss in sitting with or assisting other wounded soldiers besides me. While on leave in 1863, I came to Delaware. I visited Camp Delaware that now consisted of 2 training camps, one for black and one for white volunteer soldiers. Also on this visit, I personally removed the bodies of my father, sister, and brother from the graveyard near the Olentangy River and buried them at the recently opened Oak Grove Cemetery on South Sandusky. My mother, living in Columbus, gave approval to the tombstone I secured from a Delaware Mason. In 1864, still in the war, Cincinnati colleagues nominated me to run for Congress as 2nd District Representative. They wrote to me that I should take leave to campaign. My reply in a letter was any officer fit for duty who at this crisis would abandon his post to electioneer for a seat in Congress ought to be scalped. You may feel perfectly sure I shall do no such thing. That fall I was elected to Congress, but did not report to Washington until the fall of 1865. My superior officers, including Ulysses S. Grant, wrote that I was a productive and respected leader of the soldiers under my command. It was my privilege to serve the Grand Army of the Republic, leading fellow Ohioans. 2 months after General Lee surrendered, I was honorably discharged with the rank of Brigadier General. Sandusky Street is the main north-south street through town. It follows the approximate route of the old Buffalo Trail and was traversed by the early American Indians. As a youth, it was not uncommon to see Indians in town. They came to barter for supplies at the Little General Store, 1 block south of here, at the corner of Winter and Sandusky. It was owned by William Little, whose son John was my close friend. I affectionately referred to it as Little's World as it was the nucleus of town activity. Sandusky Street served as a portion of the stagecoach route when traveling north and south through central Ohio. I remember well an experience I had on a February 1846 trip on the Columbus to Toledo stagecoach. At this time of year, it was referred to as the Mud Pike. It followed a primitive road made worse by heavy rains and the January thaw. The stage made slow progress from Columbus on this trip through Delaware, Marion, Upper Sandusky, and Tiffin. To lighten the load for the horses, the male passengers walked for miles at a time, frequently far ahead of the coach. By midnight, we arrived in Delaware and had a capital supper and then pushed on in the dark, but before we had gone a mile, the stage tipped over. It took 2 hours to right and repair it and to get a surgeon to sew the scalp of an injured passenger. Morrison and I opted to, a colleague of mine and I opted to walk to the next stop in Marion, arriving before the stage. With such progress, I spent 3 days traveling to Lower Sandusky, now called Fremont, a distance of 105 miles. Today, I will be taking the train back to Fremont. Some of the memorable visits to Delaware post-presidency include August of 1884. It included a visit with Carrie Little. Now, Carrie was Lucy's girlfriend since age 11 in Delaware. She was also married to John A. Little, my boyhood and college chum. We returned in December of 1884. Lucy spent time again with Carrie. I rode with Judge Jones that day around town and up the river for a sight of the old farm of boyhood with its hosts of associations with Mother, Sister Fanny, Uncle Sardis, and the early friends. So many memories of the day trips and the extended stays as a child to the farm north of town. It was quality family time spent on the property purchased by my father prior to his passing in 1822. One summer, while serving as governor, Lucy and the children resided at the 124-acre farm. I cherished the visits made that summer from Columbus. A June 1887 visit included a purchase of rocking chairs of Delaware make for myself and Lucy. They received extensive use on the front porch of Spiegel Grove. My most recent OWU Board of Trustee meeting minutes show 1890, the trustees are hopeful for a new campus building. Last year, I assisted in the ceremony to lay the cornerstone at University Hall that read, "Christ the Chief Cornerstone." Commencement that day consisted of 93 graduates, a third of which were female. My walks included the Sulfur Spring each morning at 6 a.m. and one to Oak Grove Cemetery to visit the gravesite of father, mother, and my two siblings, Lorenzo, who died at age 9 drowning in a ice skating accident, and Sister Sarah, who died at age 1 of medical complications. This weekend, I was pleased that University Hall was nearly under roof. Delaware is a special place. Lucy and I spent our childhoods here. She moved to Delaware from Chillicothe after the passing of her father. Her mother wanted to be close to her two sons who were attending Ohio Wesleyan. They lived near the corner of Spring and South Franklin, 3 blocks south of the current county jail. Lucy and I possess a deep fondness for this town. Alas, it brings freshly and painfully to mind the absence from my side of my cherished Lucy. She passed of a stroke 3 years ago in our home at Spiegel Grove. I miss her so, but I trust we'll be together again someday. Now, if you'll excuse me, I want to stop by the spring and drink a tumbler of the best water in the world before the train departs the station for Fremont. Have a blessed day.
In closing, the picture I showed here as this last picture was the home that he mentioned north of Delaware that he used to love as a child with his mother, taking that trip up for a whole day and spending it up outside of the town of Delaware. The house still stands, we believe, across from Elephant Lumber, Just before you get north of town, there's a Wendy's and McDonald's. Just before that is Elephant Lumber on the west side of the road. This house is on the east side of that road. Regarding President Hayes, he came here one more time after his appearance this time that we heard from him today. He came here on August 15th, 1892. It would be his last visit to this community, as he died on January 17th, 1893. He had come here on August 15th, once again because of an old friend who had passed away. Judge Thomas Jones, the man that I mentioned who had taken him around town on the carriage ride. But at 76 years of age, Judge Jones, who he spoke of as being one of his earliest and certainly his best friend still living in the community up to that day when he came here. That would be his last trip to this community. I'd like to thank you all for coming today, and I hope you're not too tired for your walk, on your walk. We appreciate you being here. If you had any questions, we could answer them, and we would invite you back for various meetings and programs we have here at the barn. Thank you all.